thank you very much for being here. I know the competition was tough. So my name is Libertad Gonzalez. I'm an associate professor at Pompeu Fabra and an affiliated professor at the Barcelona BGSE, of course. I work in labor economics, public economics, and health economics. Today's paper is more about health. So the project I wanted to tell you about today is about the effects of scheduling birth early on infant and child health. And this is joint work with my co-authors, Cristina Borra from my hometown of Seville, and Almudena, Sevilla from Queen Mary in London. So let me start with a brief introduction to tell you, why we should care about this stuff as economists. So we know that both birth weight and gestational length are associated with both infant health and long-term outcomes that we care about. So on the one hand, when thinking about infant health, there's a medical literature that documents that babies born smaller or with fewer weeks of gestation tend to have more health problems shortly after birth in the following weeks and months. And some of those problems include respiratory disease, feeding problems, and conditions such as jaundice and others. On the other hand, a recent literature in economics has shown that birth weight is associated with things like, so children that are born smaller have slower cognitive development, attain lower educational levels, and earn lower incomes as adults. So birth weight seems to be associated with a number of things that we care about. Now, the extent to which these associations are causal is unclear. For example, birth weight, if a child is born smaller, this could be because of underlying health problems that may not improve with more time in the womb, for instance. Okay, so in this paper, we try to get at whether there's a causal component in these associations. And of course, whenever we have a causal question in mind, we need to have a very specific manipulation or treatment to focus on. And here we're going to focus on a very specific manipulation, which is going to affect gestational length and birth weight. And that manipulation is the elective scheduling of birth. And by this, I mean, when you schedule the delivery date for non-medical reasons, so for convenience reasons. Now, you may not know this, but in many countries, a large fraction of births do not take place spontaneously because the mother goes into labor, but they're actually either induced with drugs or they take place via a scheduled or non-scheduled C-section. And a large fraction of those are not medically indicated, but elective. So for convenience reasons for either the family or the health center or doctor. So for example, in the US, more than 50% of all births are either cesarean sections or inductions, and a large fraction of those are not necessarily medically indicated. So this is widespread. We're going to study the causal effect of these early elective deliveries on infant and child health. And of course, whenever you schedule birth early, this is going to, by construction, reduce gestational length and birth weight. So this is going to be our instrument, which is going to shift both gestational length and birth weight. In terms of our contribution, to the best of our knowledge, I think we're the first to establish a causal link between early elective delivery, or if you prefer, gestational length as shifted by early elective delivery, and child health beyond birth. We're going to be able to follow these children over time. Today, I'm going to tell you about up to age 3, because the natural experiment is still pretty recent, but we're going to be keeping an eye on these children as they grow up. Okay, so then let me tell you first about the natural experiment that we exploit here. It's going to be in Spain. So since 2007, Spain offered a generous, unconditional child benefit to all mothers. So you have a child, and a few weeks later, you fill out a very short form, and within a few weeks, you have 2,500 euros in your bank account. So it's a one-time lump sum payment, which I'm going to argue is relatively generous. So in relative terms, we can think of it as several months of salary for your average family. So for example, at the time when it was introduced, the benefit amounted to almost 5 times the monthly minimum wage of a full-time worker, and more than twice the median monthly earnings for employed women. So, like I said, several months of salary. Now, in 2010, the government announced a first round of budget cuts as a result of the recession, and the child benefit was one of the first things to go. So the government announced in May that this baby bonus would stop being paid for babies born after December 31st, 2010. This is 7 months after the announcement. So in May, the government announces the benefit is going to be canceled. And women with due dates around the threshold, so close to December 31st, were already pregnant at the time of the announcement in May. So let me tell you the simple model that we have in mind in order to think about the expected effects of this policy change. So the simple model that we have in mind goes something like this. A family derives utility from consumption and child health. Okay, very simple. Of course, family likes both more consumption and better health. The only choice variable here is going to be families can choose the delivery date by scheduling birth before the due date. We're going to assume for simplicity that if you don't schedule birth, you have the baby on your due date. Your due date is at some point in January 2011, and your only choice variable is whether you schedule early or not. So, I mean, in the simplest version of the model, the only reason for scheduling birth early is if you schedule before the threshold date for benefit eligibility, you're going to increase your income, you're going to receive the benefit, so higher consumption. But child health is a decreasing function of, so the earlier you schedule, the worse the child's health. And this can be, you know, so health is strictly or weekly decreasing in how early you schedule. Okay, so this very simple model is going to predict that, so a family will either not schedule and have the baby on the due date, or schedule right before the benefit cancellation date, so say on December 31st, 2010. So, you know, once you allow for heterogeneity, the model predicts bunching of births right before the due date and a halt right after the threshold. So we expect to see, you know, an excess births right before the benefit is canceled, and those births should be missing from, say, early January 2011. We can also use the model to think about the types of families that will be more likely to react to the benefit cancellation by scheduling birth early. And I mean, very intuitively, we expect families to react more, or to, you know, families will be more likely to schedule early if they expect smaller or no health effects, for example, because the due date is very close to the threshold. If they value consumption more relative to infant health. If their income level is low, because they're going to value the extra income more. Or if they find it less costly to schedule birth early. There's a parameter there that tells us that it may be costly to schedule early. Okay, so that's it for the model. I just wanted to show you what we expect in terms of timing and heterogeneity. The empirical strategy is going to be very simple. We're going to follow a difference in bunching strategy. And by this, I mean something very simple. We're just going to compare the timing of births and the health of the children for babies born right around the threshold. So December 31st, 2010, using the surrounding years before and after as kind of control years. For the health outcomes, we also use October and November births as control months for reasons that I will explain in a second. For data, we use administrative data for Spain, so we combine birth certificate data and hospital records for so this is for the universe of babies born in Spain annually, and for the universe of overnight hospitalizations in Spain. Okay, so I'm gonna jump straight to the results. I'm gonna show you 3 sets of results. First, I'm gonna try to convince you that in fact the benefit cancellation affected the timing of births, and a bunch of families actually did schedule birth right before the benefit cancellation. That's going to be a graphical, just a couple of graphs. Then I'm going to show you that, as expected, as a result, children were born with lower birth weight. I'm going to show you outcomes for health at birth from birth certificate data. And then I'm going to show you some results for health after birth. In particular, today I'm going to tell you about health outcomes as reflected in hospital stays for up to age 3. Okay, so the timing effect. I'm just going to show you graphically. I'm going to spare you the regressions. This is the horizontal axis is just, The horizontal axis is just 12 years, so the benefit cancellation year and the 10 years before, 1 year after. And the vertical axis, what you can see is the percentage of those babies who were born very close to the turn of the year, who were born in December versus January. So babies who were born either in the last week of December or the first week of January, how many of them are born in December? In normal years, we would expect around 50% if there's nothing else going on. Okay, so this is the data. So what we see is that, in fact, in most years, between 49 and 51% of babies are born in December and the other 50% in January. The benefit cancellation year is clearly an outlier, with 56% of these turn-of-the-year babies born in December. I mean, I can put standard errors, and this is clearly, so this is statistically significant. Let me show you this. Let me show you this same timing effect in a different way. So this is only the very last week of the year. Here I'm going to show you the last 8 weeks of the year and the first 8 weeks of the following year. And now what I'm going to show you is the difference in the weekly number of births between the benefit cancellation year and the 3 surrounding years, 2 years before, 1 year after. Okay, so this is where you can see kind of the bunching and the whole more clearly. We see that the very last week of the year, there's an unusually high number of births, about more than 1,000 too many births relative to the surrounding years, maybe a little bit in the week before that as well. And then we see this hole here in the first week of January, so too few births in the first week of January. So this is the timing effect, and we've run a bunch of regressions that confirm that this is in fact there, and about maybe 2,000 births were moved from January to December. Okay. Now, of course, we would expect that if these babies are born earlier, they should have fewer, shorter gestational length and lower birth weight, and that's in fact what we see. So here I'm going to show you average birth weight for children born, again, last week of the year or first week of the following year for this 12-year period. Okay, so during this period, we see an increasing trend in average birth weight. So babies are born slightly heavier over time. In black, you have a linear trend using the first 10 years, so excluding the benefit cancellation year. And in blue, I'm just highlighting the range of variation around the trend. Again, the benefit cancellation here is a clear outlier with average birth weight much lower than you would expect if you look at the year before or after, or the trend. In terms of magnitude, if you look at the difference between this point and the trend or the surrounding years, this is about 20 grams lower. Now, this is, of course, only an intent to treat type of effect, because only a small fraction of the babies born in this 2-week period were actually shifted as a result of the policy change. So if we rescale those 20 grams by the 6% of babies who were actually shifted, we're talking about a large effect, more than 200 grams per affected baby. We see also a significant effect, obviously, on weeks of gestation at birth. Okay, let me just show you quickly some regressions, just to explain what our what our identification strategy is here. So in our regressions, we have, for example, birth weight of child I born on day T as a function of family characteristics, turn of the year dummies, month dummies, and then our variable of interest is an indicator for whether the baby was born around December 31st, 2010. The only thing I want to say here is that we're not comparing the health of December babies to the health of January babies, because that way we would be conflating the causal effect of shifting with compositional effects, because the babies who were shifted may not have been, your average baby. Okay, so continuous birth weight, we see a significant effect. Sorry, the 4 columns are 4 different samples when we include only 1 week before and after the threshold, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and 4 weeks. So as we broaden the threshold, there's fewer and fewer babies affected in the sample as a fraction of the sample. We also look at a bunch of thresholds because we really care about, so we worry about babies born, at very low birth weight. So below 1.5 kilos, 2.5 kilos, those are really very small babies. We don't find any increase in the fraction of really small babies. The increase is around kind of median birth weight. So, maybe doctors were not scheduling births that were not full term. Okay, in terms of, again, if we rescale the effect to get the effect on the treated, this would be about 200 grams per shifted baby. Okay, and now finally, let me show you some results on health after birth. So it's, again, the same specification. Our control group is October and November babies, and also the surrounding years, so it's a difference in difference type of specification. And I'm just going to show you the main results. So we can look at hospitalizations at different age ranges and for very detailed diagnosis. What we find is an increase in hospitalizations at ages between 1 week and 2 months for the baby. So we don't find an increase in hospitalizations right after birth. We don't find an increase in birth complications. But we do find that babies, when they're very small, they get hospitalized significantly more often. And the diagnosis, which is driving this effect, so the effect is entirely driven by respiratory disease, in particular bronchitis. So just to give you one number here, we find that the affected cohort of babies experience a 1 percentage point increase in bronchitis hospitalizations, where the average hospitalization rate for bronchitis is 3%. So this is a 1/3 increase. But again, only 6% of these babies or so are affected. So if we rescale it, for babies who are actually shifted, we're talking about a 400% spike in bronchitis hospitalizations at ages 0 to 2 months. So a large spike. However, we do not find any effects beyond 2 months of age. So after this, we don't find that these babies are hospitalized for respiratory disease later on. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here. So what we find is that this benefit cancellation led to at least 2,000 births scheduled earlier, out of 9,000 births a week nationally. The average affected baby was born about 1 week early and about 200 grams smaller as a result, but we find no increase below 2,500 grams. And these babies experienced a sizable increase in hospitalization rates during the first few months of life. In particular, a 4-fold increase in bronchitis hospitalizations. We don't find any persistent effects up to age 3, but I think the jury is still out. We still think that there might be potential persistent health effects, because from the literature we know that exposure to respiratory disease during infancy may have long-term effects. So like I said, we're going to be keeping an eye on these babies as they grow up. So to conclude, we think we provide pretty strong evidence regarding the health risks involved in scheduling birth early for non-medical reasons. We find that more time in the womb, even for full-term, non-low birth weight babies, seems to prevent conditions such as bronchitis in infancy. If you want, the results also highlight the importance of policy announcement effects. It may not have been a bad idea to perhaps cancel this benefit more gradually instead of with a single sharp cutoff date. And they also reveal that parents may be willing to trade off income and child health to some extent. But here we want to be careful because I don't think there was very strong causal evidence that that for full-term pregnancies, scheduling a week earlier would be detrimental. So just take this with a grain of salt. And I'm done. I think we can take questions, right?
20 minutes, exactly right. Yeah, you got plenty of time for questions.
Great. Okay, Jose?
Yes, there's one question. So there is also the interest sometimes of the doctor to do it, because if it's due on Saturday or Sunday or on Christmas, they will choose Fridays or Thursdays. Is that particular year a year in which Christmas,
No.
25th is the Thursday, then 26th is a holiday, then 27th, 28th.
I don't have the graphs, because I have the graphs daily, and you always see that, like Sundays, there's fewer births. So the day of the week pattern is the same, but it's reinforced during this period. So the first Sunday of January, really, like nobody gave birth, and so the pattern is the same. It's just, but it's not driven by that. In the regressions, we control for holiday, day of the week, and so on.
Is take-up, do you know whether take-up is a function of income, as you said, and does it affect the
Take-up was very high, so about 95% of, if you look at the number of births and the number of benefits that were paid, it was like 95%.
Like in the take-up in some early
Oh, you mean the fraction?
During the early birth, and this can affect the result.
Heterogeneity across family characteristics, you mean like income?
Exactly.
Yeah. Right, so yes, so we find that the families that reacted more were not kind of lower socioeconomic status families. For example, families with university-educated parents were more likely to react. Native women were more likely to react. Higher order births, so it looks like this was not driven by low-income families.
So I was just wondering, how much is it artifact of the fact, I go to the doctor and I say, I want to get the kid earlier because of whatever benefits, and then because I have the kid earlier, the doctor says, for the first 2 months, come in a couple of times so that I can make sure, you're being checked and
Yep.
just the fact that,
Okay.
I induced it early, so I know there's some kind of risk, so the doctor is also more risk averse in terms of saying, come back earlier, that's why you see stops at 2 months. And
So
then
this
they come normal.
this could be, but what I have here is overnight hospital stays. So I think for checkups, I think you're probably right, but I don't think they're going to keep a baby in the hospital overnight for that. But that's a good point. I should probably check. Oh, Ruben. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, I guess the doctors have not read the paper, but my idea is if I go to a doctor and I say, okay, I would like my child to be born before because of, money reason, are they fine with that? Or
So in the
is it
press,
something like, no?
yeah, in the press at the time, the headlines were, doctors are worried because families want to schedule early because of the benefit cancellation. And all the doctors that were interviewed said, we do not recommend this. This is not something we advise you to do. So that's what they said in the press. Now in practice, obviously some did do it.
The doctor does not have veto power to say no. You don't.
I have no idea. I can guess, but it would be a guess. All I know is in the data, obviously thousands of families were able to. No?
The picture about bunching that you showed, there is before the threshold, it first goes down and then goes up. Given the circumstances, we tend to call it a Nash effect.
Are you talking about this part here? Yeah, but that's not. Yeah, that's not really statistically. Yeah, that's not.
Is there any reason for this?
Not as far as I know. When I do the regressions, that doesn't show up. So it's not. No. Marta, did you? Andre?
Did you say there's no effect on the birth complications?
There's no effect on birth complications for the babies or for the mothers, or hospitalizations in the first week after birth. So.
Because in theory, what you might be worried about, right, that it could also be a capacity constraint.
Yeah, so congestion effects. So in the end, so of course we were worried about that too, and we don't think that congestion effects are driving this. We did a number of checks to rule that out, and I think, I'm pretty confident that it's not due to congestion effects, particularly because you would expect to see complications right at birth. Mari?
Are the hospital stays, so is it one night, overnight stay?
Oh, I'm not counting hospital stays for the babies that don't have a medical diagnosis. So healthy newborn that stays in the hospital for one night, that's not counted as a hospitalization.
So the stays for the bronchitis, for example, so is it usually, I don't know how severe is bronchitis, so do the babies stay for several, is it like a very severe
So we have a duration of the stay, but I don't, we've looked at that, but I don't recall. Did you have anything specific in mind?
No, I'm just thinking how severe
How
is,
se- okay, yeah, we should.
health insult, so how likely is it to have long-term effects?
I see. Yeah, okay, we should report that. Yeah. Giacomo?
Since you were saying that in the press doctors were against this, am I concerned that the children born earlier are those with worse family doctors, and that's why they don't consider
So what I think is going on is that those families who were able to shift are mostly families who had access to private health centers, because in the public system, there's only anecdotal evidence. I have some empirical evidence to support it, but it seems that it's harder to schedule in the public sector where you don't really have a doctor assigned to you. However, in the private sector, it seems, so we find the effect is stronger in regions with more density of private healthcare centers, so that's probably where the action is.
Every year there's epidemics of flu and
Yeah.
do you know this year?
Yeah. So of course, So he has a very good point about the confounding factors for the flu or other reasons for spikes in respiratory disease. So of course we've checked for whether there was any coinciding spike in bronchitis hospitalizations for other ages, and there isn't any, and we have controlled for the incidence of the flu. This was not a particularly bad flu year. Anyway, we were very worried about the flu or respiratory disease for other reasons. So we think we're pretty confident that's not what's driving the effect. Diana?
Differentiate between whether it's C-sections and person
Right. Yeah, so we don't find that there's an increase in the overall incidence of C-sections. So some of this must have been C-sections and some of it inductions, but we find a shifting of C-sections towards December, but not an increase in the overall incidence of C-sections. So we don't interpret this as an effect of procedure, so a higher fraction of C-sections, but an effect of purely C-sections a bit earlier.
So and you think that these worst outcomes are coming because babies are born earlier?
That's our interpretation, because like I said, there's no increase in the fraction of C-sections. I mean, there is in December, but not overall. Okay, thank you very much.